Hey, it's Abby from 4onemore.com. I had the opportunity to review Timeline Collection, a collection of historical timeline figures from Homeschool in the Woods. Likely, if you've been homeschooling for any amount of time, you've heard of these awesome timeline figures. When I had the opportunity to review this and receive their entire timeline collection, I jumped at the opportunity. These awesome timeline figures span all the way from creation to present day. And in this short video review, I want to show you how we use them, what kind of curriculum and what kind of resources you can use them alongside of, how to make them work with pretty much any homeschool style, and then a few more ideas if you just are kind of running out of ideas for how in the world can I use this resource. I want to give you a sneak peek into what they look like and how you can use them in your homeschool. All right, let's go. Let's chat about what you get when you purchase the Timeline Collection. You will be able to download these and you will get two parts of this download. The first part are timeline figures that come in wall or notebook size, and you have the option of with text, like a summary of each of the figures, or with just the name and date. And this way your kids can be responsible for adding the summary if they're using these in notebooking or on their own timeline. Now, in this collection, there are over 1,260 figures, including 80 bonus figures. And so part one allows you to print off on each page. It would look like this, where you'd have several figures per page, and I went ahead and printed off. This is the one with the text, so I wanted to have the summary for my children right there. So that's in part one. Now part two of the download is actually really cool because they are really high quality images so that you can resize them and use them for different applications. So I love this idea for creating your own coloring pages. If you have younger kids that, their older siblings are making timelines, but your 4-year-old is not quite yet, you might say, okay, I want to just have this one picture. So you will go to the second part where there's high quality graphics. You will find this picture and you can resize it to say fill a whole sheet of paper, and then they can have a coloring page. Or if you want to resize them in other ways for different, your child has a report or they're making a poster of, whatever the topic is, and you want to have different pictures from the timeline figures, part two is going to be awesome because you can resize them and use them for all different projects. So I think this is really versatile, and you're getting tons of ways to use each timeline figure. So this is why it's awesome for homeschool families, especially if you have kids at all different levels. They can all be using the same figures, but you can use them for different applications in different sizes and in different formats. Now let's also chat about the different ways that you could get this resource. So they have a download format, or you can get it on CD. So my experience is with the download, and I find it really easy. I downloaded it and I saved it to my computer, so I always have it. But if you'd rather have a CD of these, you would use them in exactly the same way. But instead of the download, they would send you the CD, and then you'd have to use that in your computer to access. So those are the two different ways you can get a hold of these resources. And then they have different license types. They have family, school, classroom, I believe. Let me see, family, teacher, and school. And I did get the family license, which allows me to make as many copies as I want to use with my own kids in my own homeschool. So it's really great for homeschool families. You're paying one time. You can use these things for your whole, your kids' entire schooling career. And there are so many ways to use these resources that you will definitely get your money's worth. So I had used these timeline figures years ago with my boys when we were studying history, and they mesh really well. We use them with the Mystery of History curriculum, which encourages timeline use. And so we use them as a resource to go with Mystery of History. And my boys did create a huge timeline that was amazing for them to visualize history. You know, history could be such an abstract concept that unless you do something hands-on, like a timeline, sometimes it just goes over their head and they don't really understand that something in this part of the world was happening at the same time over here, unless you put them together on a timeline. And then your kids can say, oh, that makes so much more sense. This is happening at the same time. So I am personally a former social studies teacher in the public school classroom. And if I would have known about these resources, I probably would have bought them for my use in my own classroom. But I didn't learn about them till I was a homeschool mom. So I think they're awesome. And it's definitely an aspect in a lot of history courses that's missing, is that timeline, visualization of the content, and also the hands-on aspect. So when my boys were really young, we used timeline figures from Homeschool in the Woods, and I purchased them way back then. And, we only used like a certain portion. This timeline collection is creation to now, and I've never owned the entire one, which is why I wanted to try it out. But we had one specific set from Homeschool in the Woods back then, and we did use a humongous timeline made out of one of those cardboard sewing mats that you can fold up. And for young kids, the bigger the timeline, the better. However, as I got older, we started doing individual notebook timelining so that it was on a smaller scale as they got older. So this time around, when I had the chance to review the whole entire timeline collection from Homeschool in the Woods, I'm using it with my 5-year-old daughter, who has never done formal history yet, and we're just easing into it. But what I loved about trying this out with her is that in church, in their junior church program, we started this fall with creation. And they've been really plotting through the main themes and working through the Old Testament. So I thought, well, what better way to introduce history to her than to use this resource? And she already knows some of the stories, but so because creation starts, of course, with a biblical account, and as they're weaving in the biblical account, they're going to start putting in what civilizations are around during that time, what's the rest of the world doing while this biblical account is happening. And it's like a big aha moment for kids when they say, oh, wow, the Bible didn't happen in a vacuum. There was actually world history going on while these stories were happening. So this is what we did, and here's how we used it. So I printed off, starting at creation, and I printed off several pages, and she colored them. Then, as we started putting them on a timeline for her to hang in her room, we would read the story or rehearse the story or look in like a history encyclopedia and talk about it, because some of these things are big deal for a 5-year-old, like the Sumerians and, these ancient cultures. It's a little bit over their head, but it actually made a lot of sense to her, looking at maps and looking at here's where the Bible stories were happening. And at the same time, this is this culture over here. And so what we did is we just went ahead and got some big paper and made our timeline. And you can see that it's just really simple. She colored it, but it's all produced by her. She feels a lot of ownership with this. And it's colorful, and she can actually visualize it and then go through and review and tell me the stories and say, well, this is a creation. And God created the animals, and he created these things. And then by the time he got to this day, he created animals. On the same day, he created Adam and Eve. And she can go through and explain to me what happened. So let me show you this a little bit closer up. So here's my recommendations. These timeline figures are made to be used by anyone from K through 12. They are so versatile. You can use them for any of your kids at any level. You can also use them as a great resource with any history curriculum. We use them with Mystery of History, but I also know my son who's using Memoria Press for some of his history right now. These would be great also for that. You can use them with book reports, even books that they're just reading. You can probably find a timeline figure or two that goes along with those books and include them in a book report for some visuals. I mean, there are so many uses for these. Another great way that these are organized when you download them is that they're organized alphabetically. So if you just want to search that way, you can. or they're organized chronologically, or they have several other ways they're organized to make it really quick and easy. If you're not going exactly through every figure, you can find what you need and jump right in and use it. So it goes along with any curriculum. You really can use it, even so you can add this to what you're already doing to expand the hands-on and visual experience of your kids. Now, I think you could probably use these timeline figures also almost as a standalone resource to say, these are the topics we're learning in history, and then just get a great history encyclopedia to go alongside, grab an atlas and a globe, and you really could craft your own history. You could absolutely use this as your spine. Go right through, learn. Okay, your kids read the little summary and they stick it on their timeline. You need to and teach them how to research. Let's find out more. Let's look on YouTube and see if there's videos explaining this culture or this event or this person. Let's get some books from the library. Oh, there's this Alexander the Great. Let's go find out what he's like and go find books about him. You could totally use this as a spine and just work through. Listen, it goes from creation all the way to present day. So you've got all of history in there. Some courses are just ancient history. So you could totally use this for several years of history. You have your ancient, you have your Middle Ages, you have your modern history, you have your American history. If you just want to focus on that American history, you can use this for so many history courses that it's unbelievable. So those are some of my recommendations. And let me show you a bit more about this product. So if you're a little worried about creating a timeline for the first time or using a lap book with this resource, you don't need to worry, because when you purchase this timeline collection, they will also give you help with lap books and timelines. They'll give you resources. There's places to download. When you get your product, you can download those helps. So they walk you right through it. How do you create a timeline? How does it work? Or if you want to go the lap book route, they walk you through that as well. So don't worry if you feel like you don't quite know how to make a timeline work in your homeschool. They will also help you with that as well. So these timeline figures are so user-friendly. Let me read to you a few of the ways that they're indexed. So if you don't want to go chronologically and just want to look up certain aspects of history, these are some examples of how well organized they are. So if you just want American Revolution, they've got an index for that. Or if you want authors, that's awesome. So your kids could use this with book reports and with literature, not even history. This is really thinking outside the box. They have explorers. They have religious figures. They have scientists, totally use this with science curriculum. They have a whole index of wars, or just World War I, or just World War II. Theologians, Old Testament, New Testament, military leaders, composers. You can add this to your music study. Disasters, civil acts. They also have ancient wonders, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient China. They have architects, artists. How about emperors or prophets or presidents or even early church? Did you hear several of the topics that you could totally expand this from just history curriculum? So these timeline figures are usable all across the content spectrum in your homeschool just because of the way they're organized. It's amazing. They've taken the work out for you. So you as a homeschool mom, you just need to download it, open it up, and get going and get using this resource. It's amazing. So what else can you do with these timeline figures if you don't want to use them in a traditional timeline? Really, the sky's the limit, and if you Google or Pinterest this and you check it out, you will find probably hundreds of other ideas. I will mention just a few. But because you can use these across the curriculum and across the content areas, there really is no stopping you. So because of the indexes, you can use these to go with literature, book reports, anything related to that. You can use these in your science for notebooking. When your kids learn about inventors, you can have them do a report or just add it to their notebook as a timeline figure in their notebook. You can use these along with your Bible curriculum because you could just pick the Old Testament or New Testament or the prophets. You can use these to help your kids learn the presidents. Why don't you create a mini little book that your child creates and just download the presidents and have them flip through that and learn the presidents? You could totally do a World War II map and timeline, and like a map where you put all the people and events on this big giant map, kind of based on where they happened. That would be really cool. You could also use these, like I said, as coloring pages. So you might have a bunch of little ones in your house who are not quite doing homeschool yet, but they don't want to be left out. So if the whole family is doing the same history topic, for example, you can use the file that comes in here in this resource that you can resize and make a big coloring sheet for your kids. And your youngest can have their own schoolwork, which is a coloring page based on the history of the day, right? The timeline figure you're working on. What about flashcards? That's a super great idea. You could print off one of the timeline figures for the front that just has the name and date, and of course the picture. And then on the back, you can print out the timeline figure that also includes the summary, and then glue them on an index card, a 3x5 card, and you've created an amazing set of flashcards. If you want to make them last a little bit longer, you can laminate them or put transparent contact paper on them and make them a little more heavy duty. Hey, I'm even having a brainstorm right now as I'm recording this because I teach piano lessons. So I could actually go to the Composer's Index and I could create either fun, like coloring book size, dividers for my piano students' notebooks with different composers. I just thought of that. Or I could create a mini timeline of the composers, or I could create trading cards of the composers. Hey, trading cards is a fun idea. What if you took all the presidents and your kids made trading cards and you came up with some sort of trading game and they traded their favorite presidential cards? I mean, oh, that sounds like so much fun. There are so many ways you can use this. You can create your own game, like make your own Monopoly board and use the timeline cards as, so you pick up, you could do this based on wars. So you do a World War II game or something, right? You print off the World War II timeline figures. And, if you pick up a negative thing where there's a battle and the Allies lose, you have to go back, or you lose your turn or something. The Allies win, you skip ahead. I mean, there are so many creative things you could do with these timeline figures. Have I missed any? I'm sure I have. But that gives you a few ideas to get you started. I hope this little video review has been a great help to you as you make a decision about timeline collection for your homeschool. Now go head over and read some more reviews from the Homeschool Review Crew, and I will link to those below this video. In the meantime, happy homeschooling!